Jacqueline Harn is with us, chairwoman for the Georgia Young Republicans, Democratic voter Rhonda Fulgenetti, and also independent voter Daryl Triplett. Guys, welcome back. I love to talk to each of you and hear your perspectives on some of these important issues. This one front and center in our nation's capital, but I think more big picture, a lot of cities are going, all right, well, I don't love crime in my community. What's going to be done? Or don't come to my community and I don't want to see the National Guard. Daryl, let me start with you. You've been a police officer for more than 30 years. What's your perspective on the president's push in D.C. right now to crack down on crime?
Listen, folks, just because numbers are down, it doesn't mean that we get a pat on the back. I believe that we have great police officers out there, and they're trying to do the right things. One homicide is too many. And, like you've said, I have over 30 years wearing a badge as a police officer, and I can tell you firsthand that numbers on a piece of paper, they can be maneuvered. And, like I heard you say when we came back from commercial break, does that matter to a mother who's lost her child to violent gunfire? These thugs roam on our streets right now, and you think she cares about stats? No, she doesn't. She cares that our streets has been untamed for a number of years. That's what she cares about, and it's time for someone to do something about it. And that's exactly what President Trump is trying to do. Again, half of the arrests, don't forget, are juveniles, carjackings and robberies and stuff like that, over 51% last year. And this year, we're on track for even a higher number. And that's why I agree with the president for bringing in, and I think most law enforcement agree with the president decision to bring in the National Guard when we're dealing with stuff like this. The law allows it, the numbers demand it. And public safety for our capital, it depends on it.
We are already hearing from a number of Democratic mayors who are saying, not in my city, we've got this handled. Rhonda, let's talk to you. You're an attorney, as a citizen and also as a legal eye. What are your thoughts on the president's approach here and what
did not call out the National Guard on January 6th? That was a full-on riot and assault on the Capitol, on the Capitol Police, and the people of D.C. And he didn't implement the power he's doing now on that date. So I think if we start with that, we can then look at how radical the idea is of calling out the National Guard. I go to D.C. all the time. I have friends and family that are there, and no one that I've talked to, including police officers, wants to see tanks and National Guard officers on the streets there. Now, we can talk about fudging the facts. At this point, the president hasn't led us to any alternative set of statistics to show that this is a problem. And I'm not saying there's not crime in D.C., there's not crime in New York, there's not crime in Chicago, but our police officers are doing a really, really good job in those cities and other cities around the country, as are the mayors, Republican and Democrat. So to bring in the National Guard at this point is setting a precedent that is dangerous for the country. I don't think it's going to work. Honestly, I think it's scaring people, especially the students in D.C. are really, really concerned about what they're seeing. And also, I think at this point, Marnie, and to the rest of the panel, what does he intend to do in the future? What is the game plan? What is the strategy here? We do not need the federal government to come in and do these things. He campaigned on that. He campaigned on keeping the states independent and letting them do their own thing. With abortion, that was the highlight of that argument in his campaign. But I think it's very important to start with the two premises that he didn't do it on January 6th. He campaigned on something totally different. And I don't think it's necessary at this point. And legally, I think it's setting a precedent that the other states are going to start fighting if he decides to move there.
Jacqueline, let's bring you into the discussion. You are the chairwoman for the Georgia Young Republicans. One argument that we have heard is, all right, if you're concerned about crime, President Trump, then why not go to Memphis, which has one of the toughest crime problems in the country? What are your thoughts on this approach in D.C. and other cities that are facing violent crime?
I support what the president is doing because at the end of the day, Washington, D.C. is our nation's capital. They should be welcome to visitors, foreigners, anyone alike who actually wants to be there, work there, intern there at the heart of our nation's capital and actually be safe. I mean, you hear reports that the numbers are down. Whatever. At the end of the day, you show that data fact sheet to, like you mentioned, a parent who lost their son. I think there was a 3-year-old who was shot recently after the 4th of July celebrations. Show those numbers to that parent and see if that makes them feel better. Because at the end of the day, I believe it's 65% of District of Columbia residents believe that crime is a huge issue. In the first few days of arrests that President Trump and National Guard and team made, 29 of those people were illegal aliens who actually had orders to leave, and they were still living here, and no one was addressing it. And so it's those little things to where, yes, is this a little bit of a different scenario? And yes, should we actually be also looking at cities with huge and high crime rates? Memphis, Atlanta, Chicago. I mean, I live in Atlanta. Again, there's a huge crime issues here. We need to actually take care of those cities as well, but we need to protect our nation's capital first. I believe President Trump said a quote the other day to where, hey, the restaurant, if their door is dirty, don't go inside. The kitchen also is probably a mess. Same thing here at the nation's capital. We need to actually have a clean, safe, protected nation's capital.
You know, it's not a surprise that this has become so highly politically charged. I think everything nowadays, it ends up that way where it's one side or the other. I like to look at a more diplomatic approach. And so, Daryl, I'll go back to you, and it comes down to police autonomy. You heard the mayor say we want to be able to enforce the laws in our community, and we don't need the federal government to step in. But isn't there a middle ground? And I'll pose this question to each of you. What does that look like? I mean, I hear what you're saying, Rhonda, that, you know, states are in charge of their own communities. But is there a compromise, or am I being too Pollyanna, Daryl, about that idea?
You know, remember, this is my go-to. The definition of insanity is doing things the same way and expecting a different outcome of it. And this president is doing things a different way, and we should expect a positive, different outcome from this. Remember, none of this is easy, you know, and until you, and like I said, I've been a cop for 30 years, until you've held the hand of a dying victim, or until you've plugged the bullet hole of someone that to keep them from bleeding out, or until you've heard someone cry out for their mother for the last time as they're dying and slowly fading away from this earth, you don't get it. You don't get it. The crime is totally, you know, out of control. And like I said, these criminals are running around like the Wild Wild West, just shooting up the place. And, you know, I think at some point we have to do something different, and you have to let the man go ahead and do his job, what he needs to be done. I don't care why he started it. I don't care where it starts, but it needs to start, and let the president do his job.
Rhonda, and I hear what you're saying about January 6th, but can't the president also try to tackle crime with it being separate from that? Where do you see the middle ground in that?
So I'd like to see the middle ground, Marnie, where if there are specific incidents or specific, you know, areas where it is necessary to bring in the National Guard, then maybe we can talk about doing that, right? But I think we have special task force in every police department in the country, and we're not even deploying them. And that's in Republican and Democratic cities. So if the president sees a need in a certain area of Washington, D.C. to give the police officers support, then fine, let's do that. But I've walked around the Capitol. There's no threat when you're walking on the mall right now. There's been no riots there. There's been no additional attacks there. There are certain places where we're seeing the National Guard where it's just scaring people, to be totally honest. And, you know, when we're talking about visitors coming into D.C., is that what we want them to see? But if there's certain areas of D.C. that he thinks he needs to clean up, maybe we try that, and we work with the police department and the task force we have in the police departments in those limited areas. I'm very concerned legally about the precedent this sets, and the president isn't a dictator. We all have to remember that. We've elected other officials in other states to govern these types of things. And if we just sit back and are complacent and let the president try to literally litigate and govern all areas, that's going to be a problem moving forward in terms of the states having autonomy and, frankly, the police departments having autonomy, which they've earned and deserve.
And Jacqueline, let me end with you. Part of the discussion around crime in D.C., and you could argue in other cities, you brought up Atlanta and Chicago, is youth violence. You know, you're a young Republican. Is there more that can be done to reach out to the youth, and I guess politically speaking as well, so that we're less divisive, but to try to get into these areas and to educate youth and to have a different approach than what we've been doing when it comes to youth violence and crime and even prosecution of some of these heinous cases?
1000%. If you look statistically, COVID is what caused a huge bump in crime rates. And I believe that there were in general just too many kids allowed, and juveniles, kids, whatever you want to call them, allowed to do whatever they wanted to do. I'm originally from Savannah, Georgia, and we had local leadership back in the day to where they set up community programs, right? And so in middle school and high school, instead of these kids getting involved in gangs, bad activities, stuff they should not be doing, there were summer programs set up between school years to where they were actually kept on positive tracks and doing positive activities instead of getting involved with the wrong crowd. At the end of the day, you say they're juveniles. And so we have to stop that early on from them being involved with gang activity. But if you look at what I think President Trump is doing here in DC, I think that is a lot to do with it. If we actually sit down and we talk about, oh, well, we'll bring a National Guard when this happens. I mean, at the end of the day, DC still has a higher, I believe, rate of violent death per 100,000 people than cities like Mexico City, like Bogota, Colombia. And so when is that point? Right? Is it when another intern dies walking home from his job at the Capitol around the National Mall? Is it when another 3-year-old is shot in a drive-by shooting in their car after heading home from 4th of July celebration in our nation's capital? Like, when is that point? And so 1000%, I think talking about different community programs to get young kids involved in the right things and keep them away from the wrong things at an early age is crucial, but we're past that point at this point where something has to be done. And I think the president's doing what he believes is right.
Well, it's an important issue, and I know there are a lot of different viewpoints around it. Jacqueline, Rhonda, Daryl, thank you. You guys are all so respectful, and I always appreciate where you're coming from and what you share.